The Mongols, were they truly unbeatable? Not really. Once their hooves thundered from Asia to Europe, from the endless steppe to the edge of the sea, breaking kingdoms that called themselves eternal. Their wars left scars on every land they touched. Their name alone could silence cities. Yet across continents, there were those who stood, not with larger armies, but with sharper minds, braver hearts, and sometimes with the miracles of nature itself. Stay till the end for the epic war stories of those who dared to defy the empire that conquered the world. As the Mongol frontier expanded, one island lay untouched at its edge: Japan. To the Mongols, Japan was a warrior state shaped by the stern order and unbroken pride. In 1274, before the Mongol fleet ever reached Hakata, their opening strike fell upon Tsushima and Iki, where barely 80 samurai stood against thousands. A desperate stand that revealed the scale of the invasion now crossing the sea. As the Mongol-Korean forces advanced toward Hakata, coordinated volleys of arrows and explosives drove the samurai back across the shoreline. Night fell with Japan on the brink. The outlook was dire until a colossal storm suddenly smashed and sank much of the Mongol fleet. To both sides, the event felt like divine intervention. But Kublai Khan rejected any supernatural explanation. He insisted that with greater thoroughness, the empire could still subdue Japan. The Japanese, spared at the brink, now saw the Mongol threat with stark clarity. They built stone ramparts along Hakata Bay, drilled their troops, and waited in vigilant patience. When the Second Armada arrived in 1281, Japan was ready. The fighting dragged on for weeks across the seas off Kyushu, with night raids, boarding actions, and relentless harassment of Mongol vessels. Then, as if fated, another storm rose, more violent than the first. Hundreds of warships were crushed amid surf and reef, torn apart before they could regroup. An empire thought invincible buckled before the immensity of the sea. For Japan, it was deliverance, the kamikaze, the divine wind. For Kublai Khan, it was a lasting blemish, etched by nature's own hand.
As the map shifts westward toward the Indian subcontinent, it began on the banks of the Indus. Chased by Genghis Khan, Jalal ad-Din Khwarazm Shah fled into Punjab, dragging the Mongol army across the frontier into Indian soil. The Mongols burned Lahore and Multan, but the crushing heat, strange diseases, and long supply lines forced them to pull back. For decades they struck Punjab, seized Kashmir, and neared Lahore, yet never held ground. By the end of the 13th century, the Chagatai Khanate pushed south. But now they faced a hardened power, the Delhi Sultanate under Alauddin Khalji, a ruler ruthless in politics and coldly brilliant in war. Between 1297 and 1296, their clashes came in waves. In 1297, a Mongol force under Kedar was shattered in Punjab. In 1299, Kutlu Khwaja marched to Kili on the outskirts of Delhi. Among Alauddin's generals, none were fiercer than Zafar Khan.
My Sultan, give me the vanguard. Let me break their spirit before Delhi itself is tested.
Then go, Zafar. Strike hard, but know this battle won't end with one charge.
Zafar ignored the order, charged alone, and died, but not before bleeding the Mongols dry. Kutluk later died of his wounds. In 1303, they returned and laid siege to Delhi, while Alauddin was away on campaign. The Sultan rushed back and barred himself inside the Siri fortress.
Raising a permanent standing army, fortify the borders, and keep the grain supply under my hand.
The city could burn, not the fortress. When the Mongols returned in 1305 and 1306, their forces were smashed in two crushing defeats. Thousands were taken prisoner. Many of them were put to death in Delhi. After these defeats, no great Mongol host ever rode on India again. On this front, the empire that terrified the world had met a frontier it could not break.
As the map moves east toward the islands of Southeast Asia, the next chapter begins in Java, where the Mongols were pulled into a political trap. At this time, Java was a rising maritime power, wealthy and strategic. Kublai Khan sent letters demanding submission. His envoys crossed the sea again and again, only to be dismissed by the Javanese court. At last, King Kirtanagara lost patience. He branded the envoy, severed his ears, and sent him back as a direct insult to the Yuan. For Kublai, this was unforgivable. He vowed to answer the insult with an armada. 1,000 Yuan ships sweep out of Quanzhou, skim past Champa, and press south toward northern Java.
Let this voyage restore our emperor's honor.
With 20 to 30,000 troops, the Mongol fleet lands in Java and advances toward Singhasari. But chaos had already erupted. Kirtanagara was overthrown and killed by his own vassal, Jayakatwang. His kingdom collapsed in a single night. Kirtanagara's son-in-law, Radenwijaya, escaped and founded a new base at Majapahit. The kingdom had fallen, but what came next was something no one expected.
General, lend me your strength. We can remove our shared enemy.
Fine, we'll assist, but you will have to submit to the Great Yuan once this is over.
The deal was set. Wijaya guided the Mongol commanders inland. Within days, the combined Yuan-Majapahit force broke through every defensive line. Overwhelmed more than 100,000 Kadiri troops, captured Jayakatwang alive, and seized the capital Daha. For a moment, the city looked secured. The campaign seemed complete. After the victory, Wijaya requested to return preparing tribute, leaving the Mongols unwary. He eliminated the detachment, then stormed the UN camp in a surprise attack. Every clash decides who will rule this island. Chaos swept through the Yuan camp as Wijaya's attack shattered their lines. The battlefield lay in disarray as the night's shock still lingered. The monsoon was closing in, leaving the UN officers no time to regroup. They fled toward the coast, triggering a rushed withdrawal after 6 months of costly fighting. months that followed, the fighting ceased, and the island slowly returned to order. Villages reopened, trade resumed, and Java began to rebuild after the chaos. Wijaya consolidated his rule and founded Majapahit, which rose to become the dominant power of maritime Southeast Asia in the 14th century. The Mongols came seeking punishment, but instead became the architects of Majapahit's rise.
As the map draws closer to the Middle East, the Mamluk Sultanate emerges, a disciplined military state between major cultures. Here lies Egypt, a land shaped by ancient brilliance and cities built to outlast empires. From the heights of Cairo, Sultan Qutuz stands in silence, watching the city he must protect at any cost.
They are coming, and they demand Cairo bow to them. Everyone around me whispers that we should surrender, that no one can stand against the Mongols. I was born in chains, but fear will not rule me. Baghdad drowning in fire, Aleppo crushed beneath their hooves, Damascus frozen in fear. Everywhere they ride, cities disappear, and faith turns to ash. But this time, the fire will not reach Cairo.
News then reached Cairo that shifted everything. The great Khan Munka was dead. Hulagu pulled most of his army back to Persia, leaving only a smaller Mongol force in Syria under Kitbuka. For the first time, the Mongol advance slowed, and Qutuz realized this was the moment he had to act. He immediately called for his former enemy, Baibars, as decisive planning was the only advantage they still held.
They're moving south. We must intercept them.
Ain Jalut, narrow ground. We strike them here.
Then this is our route. Once enemies, now you're the one I trust.
And together they set the plan in motion. The Mamluk army moved east and reached the valley of Ain Jalut before the Mongols. Qutuz positioned his main force on the surrounding hills and hid several units behind the slopes. Baibars took the front line and engaged Kitbuka's troops first. The battle began with direct clashes. Baibars pressed forward, then executed a planned retreat to draw the Mongols into the valley. Kitbuka believed the Mamluks were collapsing and ordered a full pursuit. Once the Mongols moved deep into the valley, Baibars turned his troops around and counterattacked. At the same moment, Qutuz gave the signal for the hidden units to strike from both sides. The Mongol formation broke under the sudden pressure. Kitbuka attempted to regroup, but his force was outnumbered and surrounded. He was captured and executed shortly after. With their commander gone, the remaining Mongol soldiers retreated north towards Syria. The Mamluks regained control of the region and secured a major strategic victory.
Far to the east, another force of strategy and resilience rose, Dai Viet in Champa. In 1258, Mongol forces advanced from Yunnan and invaded Dai Viet for the first time. King Tran Tai Tong and Crown Prince Tran Huang fought them at Bin Len Nguyen in Pulo, but had to withdraw. The Tran court evacuated Thang Long, removed food, and avoided being trapped in the capital. The Mongol army entered an almost empty city, failed to seize the Tran rulers, and quickly ran short of supplies. A few weeks later, Dai Viet counterattacked at Dongbo Dao and forced the Mongols to retreat back to Yunnan. A clear warning that this land would not bow to conquerors. In 1283, Yuan General Sogetu attacked Champa by sea, captured Vijaya, and then planned to march north along the coast toward Dai Viet. In 1284, Kublai Khan ordered a second major invasion. Prince Togon led the northern army, while Sogetu advanced from the south. Before the main fighting, Emperor Tran Nantong convened the Dianhong Assembly to ask one question: fight or submit? Despite this resolve, Yuan forces broke Tran defenses on several fronts and quickly took Danglong again. The Tran court withdrew along the Red River toward Tien Truong and coastal bases, keeping the main command and army intact. In both Dai Viet and Champa, scorched earth tactics and constant resistance limited local rice for Yuan troops and stretched supply lines from China. When Yuan armies were exhausted and short of food, Dai Viet launched coordinated counterattacks at Ham Tu, Chuangduang, and later Taikep. These victories destroyed Sogetu's southern force and allowed Dai Viet to retake Danglong. Togon ordered a full retreat and barely escaped back across the northern border. In late 1287, the Yuan court launched a third invasion of Dai Viet, Togon on land, Admirals Omar at sea, and a separate grain convoy under Zhang Wenhu. This time, the Tran command avoided a decisive border battle and used smaller actions to delay the advance. Near Van Dan, General Tran Khandu ambushed Zhang Wenhu's transport fleet and destroyed much of the grain. Storms and confusion scattered the remaining ships, so Yuan forces at Van Keep never received enough supplies. Under pressure and hungry, Togon decided to withdraw. Land forces retreated through the northern passes. The fleet tried to escape via the Bakdang River.
They fear empty granaries more than sharp swords. Without grain, they cannot stay.
On Bakdang, Tran Hung Dao had prepared a stake field under the water and positioned troops along both banks, timing the attack with the tide. Yuan ships were drawn into a narrow section at high tide and struck when the water fell, leaving many vessels stuck and exposed. Admiral Omar was captured and most of the fleet was destroyed. The third invasion finally collapsed.